So welcome to this presentation. We are based at the vet school at Tufts University, and essentially our work, whether we're in the veterinary side or the policy side, is to advance the health and well-being of animals and people in the world. What we're going to do today, we're going to talk a little bit about what is the Center for Animals and what we do, a little bit about the MAPP program itself, which is the part that will be a little bit redundant if you attended this before. And then we'll talk specifically what I do, and in particular, I'm going to talk about an area that I'm really passionate about, which is access to veterinary care. And then hopefully there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions. And they could be general questions, or they could be questions specific to you and your path in looking for, your education. So this is actually where I am right now. So the top window on the right there is where my office is. I'm sitting here all alone, so everyone else is on Zoom today. But that's the Center for Animals and Public Policy. So it is a center that is located at the vet school. And it's pretty unique. We're not the only center like this at a vet school, but we're definitely the oldest one. We've been around since the early 90s. So what we do here at the center is work on behalf of animals, and it's sort of all anchored by the belief that animals matter, their welfare matters, and that humans and animals together, our welfare is all linked up. And if we can better understand human-animal relationships and the human-animal bond, we can improve things for people and animals. We do a lot for the veterinary students in particular. So we have curricula that we offer for students that are studying to be veterinarians, where we teach them about human-animal relationships, public policy that affects animals, and just making sure that our future veterinarians understand the different ways that people view animals in different social and cultural contexts. And we try to inform veterinary education and the practice of veterinary medicine around the changing needs of animals and clients in the community. So the work that I do around access to vet care really falls in that bullet there. So these are our areas of focus where our curricula, whether it's our master students or our vet students, all kind of highlight on these areas. So sort of the broad area of human-animal relationships, and that includes what's more commonly called human-animal interaction now. And that also includes animal-assisted intervention, so things like we talk about therapy dogs or emotional support animals, that all fits in there, and just the psychology of pet ownership and how it benefits people. And then we work in companion animal welfare and behavior, supporting pet welfare, working with homeless animals, animals in shelters, and applied animal behavior, whether that's in homes or other settings. A lot of work on human-wildlife interactions, so managing conflicts that can come up between wild populations and people. And if you were here for Dr. Rutberg's session, his work is focused pretty heavily in that area. And then the last area that we work is in sort of dealing with animals that are used for the benefit of people. So whether those are lab animals or farm animals, we do a lot of work on how we make sure that those animals have the best possible welfare, how they're regulated, and really helping people that are in the science space understand how to balance the concerns of society towards animal use, which really is changing constantly. And so that's a really important area. So what we do in the MAPP program, it's very unique. So it's unique to be a policy program that is specific to animals. And there are very few other programs similar to this. There are lots of animal studies programs. There's even a couple of animal law-based programs, but we're really the only one that sticks to policy. Sometimes people don't really know what policy is, and or they think that it's just things that government do. You have to be in Washington, D.C. to impact policy, but policy as we define it, it really includes all ways that communities act collectively. So that could be, way down to the neighborhood level, all the way up to the international level. And so we try to focus on skills that will allow our students to work in policy-based careers in the MAPP program. So that's research and communication, and really being able to analyze the data so that it can inform the policy. We also expose the students to a wide range of animal issues. Most students have, you know, a particular species or kind of animal or animal, you know, area of the industry that they're most passionate about, but we're going to make sure that they know at least a little bit about everything. So even if you're, you know, really into improving conditions for farm animals, you're going to learn a little bit about lab animals and companion animals and wildlife. And then it's also really important, if you're going to be an advocate for animals, to be able to understand and fairly evaluate multiple viewpoints on a given issue. A lot of times we have disagreements with people or changes that we want to make for a policy, but if we don't understand the perspective of all stakeholders, it's really hard to move forward, because you have to understand kind of where the roadblocks are going to be to getting to where you want to get to. So diving down a little more into the actual curriculum. So for the master's students, we offer two approaches. One is what we call a research track, and the other is more applied. So both tracks are the same in the fall. At the end of the fall semester, the students would decide whether they're going to go into the research or applied track. And then essentially, if you're in the research track, you do a research project. And if you're in the applied track, you do a field-based externship. And then there's electives in both tracks. These are the specific courses. So we have a course called Animals and Society that I direct, and that goes through the entire school year. And that's where we really look at the different animal issues and the different sort of areas that I talked about before. We also have a human-animal interaction seminar, so talking about a lot of the HAI topics with Dr. Mueller. And then we have research methods classes. So learning how to do research, both qualitative and quantitative, is really important. And then there's a how to design a project is something that everybody does. And then there's a basic level of statistics that you need if you're going to be able to understand the data to inform policy. And then in the spring, there's a public policy analysis course that really talks about how you make and analyze policy. Okay, so for the research track, it's all the core classes, plus they take an additional statistics class and an additional research methods class, which really is involved making their project. So they work with a mentor, and Shauna, who teaches that class, to develop a specific proposal and then carry it out. So it takes a bit longer, so that the research students graduate in December. So they have 6 months that they're doing their research, and they do 3 credits of electives. The applied track is shorter, so they graduate in August. They take a communicating policy positions course, which is really about writing to change people's opinions. And then they do a summer externship, which is where they work with an external partner for 3 months over the summer. And they take more electives than the research track students. This is the list of our electives that we always have. So we usually offer an animal law course. Dr. Rutberg teaches a wildlife and captivity elective. I teach an animal welfare science elective. We have an applied animal behavior one, and then we have different service opportunities that students can sometimes choose to do for electives. And the cool thing about our electives is that they're co-enrolled with our Masters of Conservation Medicine students and sometimes our veterinary students. So it's a really great way to meet students in other programs. Sometimes we do field trips, we go visit the red pandas and things like that. This is just a list of some examples of externships that students have done. This is going to be recorded, so you can see this and look through these things. But pretty much any agency or non-governmental organization or an advocacy group, anything like that, where they have animals and they work in animal issues, is a place where we would send a student for an externship. And then this is just giving you a list of kind of the breadth of the research that people do. So we have students that were we had a student that was out on the dairy farm looking at conditions for dairy cows and looking at the workers and how that was affected by the pandemic. We have different zoo-based projects that people have done, or lots of projects that have to do with veterinary medicine. So understanding how pet owners feel about certain things, or how we provide services to animals in different settings. So just a huge range of things. It does tend to line up with the interest of the faculty, because some of these are parts of ongoing research projects that we have. But the students are very engaged in developing and picking their topics. What would you do after the program? So certainly a lot of our graduates are looking for jobs in animal protection or conservation type nonprofits. We have very many working for humane societies, so they're involved in sheltering and other aspects of companion animal welfare. There's a fair bit that go on to other professional degrees, so veterinary degrees being one, but also law school and other graduate and PhD type programs. A fair bit going into government service, so working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife or for the USDA, other agencies like that that deal with animal policy. And then a field that you might not be familiar with that a lot of our graduates go in is in research compliance. So that's making sure that agencies that are doing animal research are that the investigators are compliant with the Animal Welfare Act, which is the biggest law that we have in the United States for animals. And then this is just highlighting some of our alums and the kind of jobs that they have. So we have someone who's working on grant making at PetSmart Charities. We have someone who's directing the U.S. Aspects of 4PAWS, which is an international animal aid group. Like they've been very involved in the war in Ukraine. A lot of people in conservation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and IACA compliance. So just a huge range of things. But what's important about this is that our alums are very engaged and supportive of the program. And so it's a huge benefit for our current students because we can typically network you or hook you up with somebody that's interested in what you want to do. So that provides a lot of great sort of informal career mentorship. We have rolling admissions with 2 application deadlines just to try to be as flexible as possible for students that are weighing other programs in their decision making. So for students that are ready to go and highly committed and have all the prereqs done, you can apply for the February 1st deadline and be admitted at that point. And then we have a second deadline, April 1st, for students that maybe they're waiting on other programs or they weren't sure, they were still wrapping up the program that they're in and they wanted to strengthen their application. And so some students apply for that deadline and get admitted at that point. So I'm going to pause at this point and see if you have any questions about the program or the application process that I can answer for you.
Hi, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, for the independent research projects, are any other faculty that are involved in the MAPP program available to be your mentor? And then along with that, is there an opportunity to continue your research past the 6-month focus that you're just like doing the full dive into your research project?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically, the most successful projects are ones that are done with the faculty here, because obviously we understand the best about how the program works. It's always a little bit of a negotiation because sometimes faculty have projects, like I have one this year where I just happen to have funding for a master's student to do a project, and I happen to have found a student who wants to do the project. So that's obviously the ideal situation where there's a project and there's a student who wants to do the project. So we try to do that. Of course, faculty always have more projects than they have time to do, but students sometimes come in with their own projects, or more commonly, they've encountered something in the first semester that they really want to take on as a research project. And so then it's a matter of finding a mentor who's willing to take on that area, especially if it's like for me, for example, if a student came to me and said they wanted to do a project on dairy cows, like I'm not going to be able to mentor that project. So I then have to find for them somebody that could mentor that project. So that's, we have other faculty, right, that know about cows. So we would try to match them up with the right fit. And then if everyone agrees, we can go forward with that. And then the student goes into a project course that they do the spring to develop their project. And then the student has to involve their mentor in the course so that they come out at the end of the course with the mentor and the student all on the same page about the plan. And then they have the 6 months to implement it. But as you kind of mentioned, research doesn't always fit into a 6-month timeline. So we end up working with the student. It depends on the priority of the student, right? So some students want to continue the project beyond, and then with that involves like trying to find additional funding or just organizing things so they can keep working on it. Whereas other students, are moving on to something else and they want to be done. So we sort of balance those priorities with, the reality that research doesn't always line up with kind of the way we want it to for deadlines and degrees, and students are different about what their priorities are. degree versus the research itself. So we try to guide the students through that, and we're flexible to allow a couple of different ways to go through the program. We do have here an HAI PhD. So for students that wanted to go on to a PhD, that could potentially connect to their master's project, but master's projects don't always connect to PhD projects. So we've also had students go do a research project here and then also go to a different PhD program. And, again, sometimes your research follows you and you're still kind of wrapping it up as you move on to your next thing. So hopefully that answers your question. It's actually pretty individual.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have a question?
Hi, I have two questions. The first one is, I'm an international student. I'm also interested in the PhD track of the HAI. And I know the PhD only accepts new students in the fall semester. And you said the MAPP, the research track, have the 16 months. I want to know, am I available to extend to 2 years? Because it's not convenient to me if I have a half year. So do not have any school. It's not convenient to me as an international student.
Yeah. I mean, international students have their own set of issues, right? So we would have to work with our director of graduate studies just to make sure that, all those factors were taken into account. But to be completely transparent, it's pretty easy to extend for another semester. We have an extension fee and sort of a prorated tuition and things like that we could do. So that would potentially be possible to do an extension for the spring semester and then move into the PhD program. That would be, contingent on successfully completing all the academic requirements from the first year of the program, and that the research was going well, and that this was, mutually agreeable between the student and the mentor to stay enrolled. But that has happened in the past.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. And also I have one more question. In our application process, we are required to write one essay, and it has one question that asks us to talk about the interest in animals and animal issues. So I want to make sure, what should we write here? So what kind of the interest be like?
Yeah, I mean, so, again, very honestly, the program is very heavy on writing. And we do believe that if you're going to be an effective advocate, you need to be able to write. And particularly if you want to do a PhD, you need to be able to write papers. So a lot of it is just giving us an opportunity to evaluate your writing. And your conversational English sounds really good, but maybe your formal written English, maybe you need a little help with your English, and so we might have to take those needs into account in setting you up for success. So you really should write about what you're passionate about, like why you're interested in the program and what you want to study. And you can write about your background and kind of what drew you to this. But it's open, it's a chance for you to show us a little bit about yourself, maybe, set yourself apart from the pool of applicants and talk about what most, motivates you. And then we get to see, will you be able to do the writing that we need in the program, or do we need to address that? And we've had students that, they just needed to get a little more practice with writing, and then they were able to come to the program and do successful. But it would be very frustrating if somebody didn't have the writing background, and that happens a lot with US students too, right? So if somebody did a straight up biology laboratory undergrad, they're not going to do well in a program where they have to write a lot of papers.
Okay, got it. So we should not just restrict by the requirement in the essay. We can write anything just to introduce ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I would stick to the topic, right? Because that's part of good essay writing is did you answer the topic? But it's a pretty broad prompt.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I have a question. So another question, I guess. So what does your incoming class typically look like? Like, what is the background of all this, of your typical background of students that are being admitted, and the class size? I think I saw online that's a pretty small program, but if you could just talk about what the classes look like as a whole, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we sort of so in my mind, the ideal class would have 10 students, but we've been growing the class, just to give more people opportunities. And so we actually have 15 students this year, which is kind of a typical number. I think and we have the capacity to take up to about 18 students. So it will always be under 20. But around 15 is about what typically we've had. And because we have 4 core faculty members and then another number of faculty that are with us for considerable chunks of the curriculum, with that amount of students, it gives the opportunity that, every student has one faculty mentor that works directly with them. So it's a lot of face time with the faculty. And so we're really committed to having it be a small program where students can get a lot of direct faculty attention. And also within the class, we can have small group discussion pretty easily if we keep it, under 20. So as far as the makeup, we have a big problem in animal welfare right now, which is that it's a white dominated space. And so we tend to have a white dominated class. There's a lot of white people who identify as women. White women is our most, most common student. That's something that we're actively addressing. We're getting some diversity scholarships, and we're trying to recruit to a wider part of why we're doing this webinar is we want to reach a wider array of folks. We would really like to have a class that's more representative of the spaces where people are going to work. We've made some progress with that as far as having some more diversity and just a more interesting bunch of people. Honestly, like if everyone looks exactly like me, I don't really enjoy talking to them as much as when I have people who are from other countries. So this year we have, a bunch of students with more of an international background in our program, which has been really, really exciting. And sometimes we get lucky and we even have somebody who identifies as a man, which is always fun too, because, again, I really think it should be more representative. But, and then in terms of their backgrounds, the majority tend to come straight out of undergrad. We get a lot of people that, have always known that they wanted to do an animal-based career, but they were messaged that the only option for them is to go to veterinary school. And so if you want to work with animals, but you decide for whatever reason you don't want to be a veterinarian, it's sometimes hard for students to know what else they could do. So sometimes we get students that, have been out of college for a couple of years and then stumbled upon us. But other times students, they were on a pre-vet track and then they decided that no, they want to do something else. So then they come to us kind of looking for a path. And then about a third of our students have been working in the professional world and then are coming back to school because they want to make a change or they want to get in a different industry or they realize they needed a different expertise. And that's really great because those students bring such valuable perspective and a richness to the class. So you shouldn't feel intimidated. If you've been out of school for a while, you shouldn't be intimidated. I mean, one of our most successful students was a sitting judge, right? So she was actually retired from court when she came to class. So she had obviously been out of school for a really long time, and she did find the program. And or on the other hand, if you're new to your career and you haven't really figured out what you want to do, we have lots of those type of students too. So it's a nice mix in that way.
Great, thank you for explaining.
No problem. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move on with the slides, and if you think of something, you can put it in the chat, and I'll get to it at the end. So now I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what I do, which just I think gives you a sense of kind of how the school works and some of the things that you could choose to get involved in if you were a graduate student here. So in the MAPP program, as I said, I oversee the Animals and Society course, and I specifically teach the companion animal module. Dr. Mueller, who's our HII person, co-teaches that with me. And then I also teach the animal welfare elective which is in the spring. I also am a veterinarian, so I do spend some of my time working as a veterinarian. I happen to be an anesthesiologist, which means I take care of animals when they're having surgery. That's a picture of me and my feral cat when she got spayed. The only time I've ever been able to hold her. So I do that in our teaching hospital, which is mostly concerned with teaching veterinary students how to do surgery and anesthesia. So my job is to teach them while providing good patient care. And then I also oversee our spay neuter clinic, which is where we teach our students how to do surgery. And we do that by using a spay neuter caseload because there's surgeries that need to be done. And we believe that's a more ethical approach rather than the old days where they actually used to take shelter animals and do surgery on them, and they wouldn't survive those surgeries. So this idea of having a humane and ethical teaching program for veterinarians who are people who are going to go work with animals in their whole career is really, really important to the school. And it's an example of how the values that are tied up in the Center for Animals are expressed throughout the whole program at the school. And then that program, the spay neuter clinic, is anchored in a larger program of community medicine. And that's where we try to look at animals that wouldn't be served by traditional veterinary models. And we're looking at new models of service delivery and payment support to try to reach more and more pet owners, which is pretty new and pretty exciting. I do research. Most faculty do research. My research is in access to vet care, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And I also do some work just looking at, pain and anesthesia. My initial research was with stress, and then with my colleague Shauna, we work a lot with shelter policy. So what do shelters do? What is the role of shelter? What services can we provide for them? These are just some pictures. So on the left is students in the veterinary program that are learning hazmat response. So that's part of our disaster emergency preparedness, disaster response. And then on the right is a picture of some of our alums from the community vet clinic, which is called Tufts Tech, which is one of our partner clinics. So our community medicine program at Tufts has 4 sort of parts to it. So we have a spay neuter clinic, which is what I was talking about, that's on the vet school campus where the MAPP program is. And we have a community clinic, which is at a nearby high school. And so that's where we send our vet students to learn primary care medicine, but they're also working with students who are in high school who are obtaining a certificate in veterinary assisting. And they're serving clients with financial limitations. So we're providing a service to the community. So that sort of theme of we're teaching, but we're also serving, that kind of shows up over and over again. We also run a clinical veterinary outreach program where we take veterinary students to animals that live in public housing and provide free services for them. And then we have a shelter medicine program which tries to connect students with opportunities. So this would be for students that want to work in the animal welfare space as a veterinarian. But all of these clinical entities offer options for master students that want to either volunteer or do research or contribute in some way. So the goals of our program are to teach the students how to do surgery, how to be a doctor. And so we're also trying to serve animals who wouldn't ordinarily be getting care. So that might be like stray dogs and cats, community cats, which are cats that live in the neighborhood but don't necessarily have an owner who's going to bring it into the vet and pay for care. Or we have owners that can't afford the fees that a veterinarian in a traditional model would charge. And that is actually becoming increasingly common. So a lot of the research that we've done, and I've done this in conjunction with Dr. Mueller and Shauna, is just looking to see like how many people that is. So we have a term that we use called financial fragility, which is the number of people that couldn't come up with $2,000 in an emergency. And it's a really big number of people. It's more than half of most Americans. And if you specifically look at families of color, it's 60 to 70%. So that is very different when you think about veterinary medicine in that way, that maybe 70% of pet owners can't afford your services. And so the ultimate goal of all this is to make things better for people and the animals too. So we sort of believe that anyone should have a pet. You don't have to have a pet, but if you want a pet, we believe you should be able to have one. And we believe that all pets deserve access to vet care. So that's sort of foundational and fundamental. The question is, how could we possibly achieve that? And this is another picture of Tufted Tech, sort of what it looks like with all the sort of doctors in training and the techs in training and the students of different levels. But this really came out of the shelter medicine space, which is kind of interesting to think about. So and I'll talk about that in a minute, but so what is community medicine? This is a common term in human medicine, and it sort of includes primary care, but also public health and epidemiology. So looking at, you know, how do we improve the health on a community level? In veterinary medicine, it hasn't been as well defined, but we're borrowing the terms from human medicine as we need to. So we define it as veterinary care is delivered directly to community members with the goal of impacting companion animal health and welfare. And the key is kind of this bottom point. So you're helping the animals, you're providing care, but you're also helping the community by being in the space. So we want to reach animals that wouldn't otherwise be able to come to us because either it's too expensive or they can't get there or there's other barriers. We do a lot of research around what those barriers are and what's the best way to overcome them. And then we also have this goal that you can actually use animal health programs to improve social capital and engagement within communities. So that's where our DEIJ work really comes into play. So as we start to understand how all the systems in the United States, and I speak mostly about the United States because that's where my expertise lies, but you can find parallels in international communities as well. But when you start to think about the harm that's been done to communities by the way our systems were set up, you start to realize that everything is part of that. So animal welfare is part of that, veterinary medicine is part of that. And so if we want to try to improve things for communities and empower marginalized groups, we need to sort of break down all of this pre-existing structural inequity, right? Things are not fair. And if we don't address the fundamental factors that make it unfair, we can't move forward. So that we do a lot of work around that. And the as I mentioned, the problems that we have with lack of diversity in veterinary medicine and in animal welfare, that's not an accident, right? There are factors within our society that drive who can have an education, who can access vet care. And if we don't address those factors, we won't be able to be a more inclusive space. So all that work is sort of wrapped up together. So going back to animal welfare and sort of shelters, this is a picture of one of our shelter partners, which is one of the MSPCA shelters. So animal shelters and shelter medicine, it's always been very mission driven, but we have this question now of what is the mission, right? So for my whole career, the mission of the animal shelter was to deal with pet overpopulation. And this is an example of kind of some of the policy issues that we talk about our students. So, you know, what is a pound? Where did animal shelters come from? What laws and policies apply to dogs and cats? And then, you know, what do vets do? So the biggest policy issue or the biggest mission of shelters was saving animal lives because we were euthanizing millions of animals. But look at this graph. This graph is getting close to zero. It'll probably never get to zero. But we have made dramatic improvements in the number of animals that have to be euthanized. And so pet overpopulation is increasingly becoming not the most important problem. And that's giving us that's causing us to rethink our mission. So maybe the mission of the animal shelter is to be a resource for the community and to help people who have animals and love their animals be able to keep their animal and care for their animal better, which is not what we would have said the mission was if you were thinking about this program in 2000, right? We would have said the mission was to stop the euthanasia of 20 million dogs and cats. So the landscape has really changed. So what we do today in animal welfare is we focus on animals that are at risk and there are people who are at risk. We'd like to keep the animals out of the shelter altogether. And part of that includes making sure they have veterinary care. And so we have the capacity now to reach a whole lot more people because it turns out that the percentage of animals that would actually ever come into the shelter is a really small number compared to the percentage of animals who live with families who could use help in providing, you know, pet food and vet care for them. In veterinary medicine, this is getting a lot of time and attention. So we've had a couple of different symposiums. This one was addressing a symposium that was held back in 2019. I just was at another one just a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of talk around how is the profession going to address this problem that not everyone can access care. I'm just going to skip over this because I want to make sure we have time at the end. So, but this is some research that one of the master students did, just looking at the types of different models that we might have for delivering care. So we might have, you know, a free clinic that we set up. We might have a spay neuter clinic like the one I talked about. We might do wellness clinics for communities that we think are at risk. Maybe we have a parvovirus outbreak, right? So we're going to put together some resources and go and have a vaccine clinic for the community. But more and more, we're starting to see full service clinics that are set up with the intent of reducing those barriers. So making it more affordable, being more flexible with options for payment, you know, maybe even having transportation, things like that. So we try to incorporate the students into all aspects of this. So we like to take the students out to the community. There's some pictures of my vet students doing some outreach work. So we did a little grooming event. This was just at one of our weekly vaccine clinics. This is really common in human medicine. In human medicine, they have the Society of Student-Run Free Clinics. Every medical school has one of these. So they partner, usually a teaching hospital, with a low price clinic in an inner city area. And then you work with folks that don't have insurance, right? But we haven't really sort of figured out how this works formally in veterinary medicine. So one of the things that's really important, this is another example of how master's students can help, is it's not always up to us as the experts to determine what the community needs. We really need to have community members say what they need and involve community stakeholders as we plan programs. So we want to have community-led initiatives, and we need to be able to know how to do a community assessment and figure out who the right partners are. And all of that is actually policy. So lots of schools have programs now. There's all different types of ones that involve vet students and other students. This is a picture of one of my students at a community cat clinic. So we're exposing our students to diverse clients. That's helping the clients and the students. We're bringing care to marginalized communities, and we're teaching what we call spectrum of care, which is kind of that there should be a range of treatment options. So a lot of my students in the MAPP program have done research around this to find out, you know, what is the impact of these programs and how is it working or not. Spectrum of care means we present a variety of options. One of the things that we see a lot in veterinary medicine is that the cost of care just keeps going up. And a lot of times people tend to present, you know, what they think is the best option, which might be the most expensive option. But we feel pretty strongly that you need to have options that the client can actually afford. So a lot of our research is looking at documenting that, because it turns out that sometimes the cheaper option is actually just as good. And so getting veterinarians to understand that and getting the research around that is where a lot of our projects have been. So I kind of flew through that because I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. I was worried about running out of time. So I'm going to put this up, which just talks about other opportunities for you to get information, and then see what questions you might have, since I went through that so fast. Does that make sense, what I was saying? Is that new to you guys?
I have another question. So not about what you were just talking about, but when you're talking about the applications, so because I saw that there's the February 1st and the April 1st, is besides just if you know that you're going to apply this program and you have everything together, is there a benefit to applying one towards the other?
Yeah.
Or is it just,
so if you're ready, I would definitely apply for the February 1st, because anyone that seems like a good fit is going to get admitted as of that deadline. But then there might be people that might get on a waiting list because we want to see, okay, does anybody else come in the April? So it kind of is like reserving your spot, if you will. So I guess it could be theoretically possible that we could find 18 amazing people in February and then we wouldn't have spots left for April. That's never happened before. So I think that would be pretty unlikely. So I wouldn't discourage you from applying in April if you're not ready, but it's definitely an advantage to apply for February if you are ready. Does that make sense?
Yes, for sure. I was just wondering, like, exactly, like how you, like, if I don't know, it was like, oh, there's 9 spots in February, 9 spots in April, but if that you explained it like the primary pool is in February and then there's additional spots in April. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, no problem. It's kind of like applying early decision in undergrad. You're kind of like saying, all right, because a lot of programs have later application deadlines. And so by committing, earlier, you're kind of getting to the front of the line like you would for early decision. But we didn't want to not have the April deadline because we do have a lot of students that, had maybe applied to veterinary school and they would want to go to veterinary school, but then if they don't get in the first time they apply, they would decide they want to come to the MAPP program as a way of strengthening their application, but they wouldn't know that by February. So that's why we want to give them that option too, in case somebody does come along later. If that makes sense.
Yes, sounds great. Thank you for explaining.
Yeah, no problem. And then while we're sort of looking at this, so on Monday, we're going to have this Animal Matters seminar with Dr. Ogier, which is going to be really interesting. She's going to talk about the war in Ukraine and some of the work that Vets Without Borders has done to help those animals. And then the other thing that I would mention is the open house in January, so that you'll have some opportunity to ask the students and the alums questions. And then we're also always willing to set up a one-on-one. So if you want to talk to the faculty member whose work aligns with your interest, we can set up an appointment either by phone or Zoom. And then if you're in New England or coming to New England, you're welcome to visit, and we can arrange, there's an opportunity to sit in on a class in the open house, but we can arrange that on a different day. We usually try to encourage that in the fall, but we could still do that in the spring if that was something that somebody was in the area and interested in doing.
So just to clarify, the open house is in person, because I'm looking right now, like that's over my winter break for.
So you would go to a Zoom class, but you could also visit in person if you wanted to.
Okay, sounds great. Yes, I know there's the train that goes from DC up to Boston, so I know there's that option as well.
Yeah, you're in DC?
Yes, I go to University of Miami right now, but I'm from DC, so I will be in DC over winter break. So I know my winter break cover, like I technically could go up to Boston for that January 9th.
I see.
So yeah, so I was looking to see that, like, if that's an option.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all online, but I think if you were, in the area, you could definitely visit. Yeah, I take the train all the time. I'm going to Philadelphia in December, and it is a really great way to get up and down the East Coast.
For sure, it's so convenient. So
yeah, and we have a student this year from University of Miami, I think.
Oh, really? Do you have their name? Could I read?
Oh, we can
know their name.
Yeah, we can talk to them and they would be willing to talk to you.
Yeah, that would be great. If there's a student from University of Miami, I would love to reach out to them and see how, their transition from being down here where I am right now to up there. That would be fantastic.
We had there's a lot of students in the DVM program from Florida, and they would go back and forth a lot during the pandemic, but
yeah, I know it's hard because here at University of Miami, there's not very many pre-vet students, because a lot of it's tailored towards going towards the med school. So everyone who is pre-vet or thinking of going to the animal sciences, we're all in these few biology classes that are animal focused. So I'm sure it's a small community of people who are doing like the sciences down here, but also interested in the animals.
Yeah, that's common. And a lot of people kind of have that experience from undergrad where, there was lots of people that were pre-med and just a couple that were pre-vet or interested in animals. And so, I always kind of called it like the weird animal people. Like, I remember my undergrad, there were 6 of us. And that is one thing that is really great about this program, is that every single person has had that experience. So you will find your people here. That's the cool thing about it. Any other questions? My cursor is going nuts, Ginny, so I can't see the chat at all. I don't know if there's anything in the chat.
None in the chat right now. But I just wanted to reiterate that, yeah, the open house is virtual, but anytime you want to come, even if it's not an open house day, you can also check with me to see what's happening with the class schedule. You're welcome to attend a class, even if it's not an open house day.
Yeah, so you guys are obviously all on our mailing list because you made it to the webinar, but the email is there and our website is there. So, you know, if you have any questions or need anything as you're contemplating or putting your application together, you know, don't hesitate to reach out.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain the program to us.
Oh, you're very
today.
welcome. Thanks for attending.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.